Welcome to the deep dive. We've got quite a story to unpack today based on the sources you've sent over. Our mission really is to brush off the historical dust and dive deep into the life of a truly, well, astonishing figure. It's a life that unfolds almost like a five-act play. You've got the idealist, the martyr, the convict, the adventurer, and then finally the exiled revolutionary. We're talking about Thomas Muir of Huntershill, born 1765, died far too young in 1799. And he's widely known, quite rightly, as the father of Scottish democracy. The material we have covers his really rapid political rise, this unbelievable global escape story, and then this incredibly long campaign, 227 years, that finally cleared his name.
Yeah, and what we're looking at here, it's more than just one man's life story. It's really about the birth of modern democratic ideas in Scotland. Muir was out there actively pushing for things like universal suffrage, regular elections, basic democratic principles. But this is at a time when the British establishment, particularly the very powerful Pitt Dundas government, saw those exact ideas as a direct threat, a threat to the whole social and political order.
Right. And we need to grasp who he was actually up against. You mentioned Dundas, Henry Dundas. He was Home Secretary, often called the uncrowned King of Scotland. This guy had immense power. He controlled the judiciary in Scotland, the administration, politics. Challenging him meant you were taking on the entire state apparatus.
Exactly. So Muir's idealism wasn't met with, say, healthy debate. It was met with outright persecution and ultimately transportation for sedition. It was brutal.
You can almost feel that sense of, impending doom or martyrdom in his own words, can't you?
You absolutely can. His words from August 1793, just before the trial, they really set the stage for this whole deep dive. He said, and I'm quoting here, "I have devoted myself to the cause of the people. It is a good cause. It shall ultimately prevail. It shall finally triumph."
Wow, that's not a man pleading his case, is it? That's a declaration, a vow. So our mission today is to unpack that whole dramatic life from, defying professors at Glasgow Uni to exile in Australia, then that incredible journey across the Pacific into revolutionary France. And crucially, we need to look at what happened much more recently. This period between 2015 and 2020 when grassroots activists finally got his name restored, centuries after the establishment tried to erase him. Okay, let's rewind. Part 1. The making of this uncompromising hero, 1765 to 1792. As you said, he wasn't exactly born waving revolutionary flags. Glasgow, 1765. Comfort, privilege. His dad was a successful hop merchant, bought Huntershill House in 82. He seems set for a comfortable establishment life. Yet almost immediately, he's clashing with authority.
That's right. And you have to appreciate his intellect. He was clearly brilliant. University of Glasgow at age 10.
Yeah.
That's a pretty remarkable. Graduate's MA at 17. And initially the plan was for him to enter the ministry. He was rooted in this very strict form of Calvinism, the Old Lick tradition.
That Old Lick background. It sounds minor, but you think it's important. That strictness.
I do, yeah. Because Old Lick Calvinism, it really emphasized moral purity, sticking to fundamental scripture. And that often meant a deep suspicion of worldly authority, especially when it interfered with what they saw as moral duty. So this idea of fundamental rights and wrongs, things that are more important than just institutional convenience, I think that was deeply ingrained in him. It drove him.
Okay, so that moral engine is already there. Then he makes the switch to law.
Exactly. And who does he study under? Professor John Miller of Millhew. This wasn't just any law professor. Miller was an intellectual heavyweight, a Republican Whig connected to Adam Smith, David Hume, and crucially, a well-known outspoken critic of Henry Dundas.
So the seeds of conflict were sown right there in his education. He's learning from the opposition, essentially.
Precisely. His whole political and legal grounding came from people who were already challenging the very system that would later try to crush him.
And you see this pattern of refusing to compromise, refusing to back down really early on, long before he's charged with anything serious like sedition.
Oh, definitely. Look at his time in the church. He becomes an elder at Catterkirk. What's the first thing he does? He gets right into a fight over patronage. Now, patronage, for anyone unfamiliar, basically meant the local landlords, the wealthy heritors, they just got to appoint the minister. The actual congregation had no say.
So the people in the pews, their voices didn't matter, and Muir steps in.
He does. This young elder takes on the propertied classes on behalf of the ordinary parishioners. And he doesn't just argue about it locally. He fights it all the way up to the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland. He challenges the whole power structure.
Yeah.
And guess what?
He won.
He won. It showed early on he was a formidable opponent, willing to take on the establishment for democratic principles at a local level.
And that same stubbornness, that same principle carries over to university life.
right into the University of Glasgow. This is where he really put his own future on the line. It's 1785, he gets involved in this internal row. He sides with Professor John Anderson, the man who later founded what became Strathclyde University, in a dispute about, well, alleged misuse of college funds and lack of financial accountability.
This wasn't just signing a petition, though, was it?
No. Muir was one of the ringleaders among the students. They actually published a pamphlet exposing what they claimed were the faculty's financial wrongdoings. Predictably, the university pushed back. They offered the students a way out. Apologized quietly, everything gets swept under the rug.
And Muir?
Muir refused. Flat out refused the deal. Instead, he voluntarily expelled himself from Glasgow University. He chose his principles over his degree, over his career path.
Incredible. While his friends who stayed got formally kicked out.
Yeah, one even lost his degree. Muir, though, he just picks up, finishes his studies in Edinburgh, gets admitted to the Faculty of Advocates in 1787, and he quickly builds this reputation. He's known for giving free legal advice to the poor, for taking on the tough cases nobody else wanted. The younger lawyers even nicknamed him the Chancellor because he was seen as so principled, so fair-minded, so uncompromising.
So by 1792, he's established. A respected lawyer known for his sharp mind and maybe dangerously, his moral clarity.
A very dangerous combination, as the government was about to find out.
Right. Let's move into part 2. Sedition and the show trial, 1792, 1793. This is where things escalate incredibly quickly.
It's quite amazing, isn't it, how fast he moves from those, local legal fights to suddenly being at the forefront of a national movement for reform. And the catalyst, undeniably, was the French Revolution in 1789. Those ideals lit a fire across Europe and certainly in Scotland.
He becomes a key figure, maybe the key figure, in the Scottish Association of the Friends of the People. They formed in July 1792, and their goals, well, they sound pretty reasonable today, don't they? Constitutional reform, more regular elections, maybe even annual ones, and the big one, universal manhood suffrage.
We really need to pause on that suffrage point. Universal manhood suffrage, meaning votes for all men over a certain age, whether they owned land or not. Today, okay, maybe it sounds standard. Back then, it was dynamite. The entire British system, the power, the influence, it was all tied up with property ownership. This wasn't just reform. It looked like revolution to them. It threatened to dismantle the whole hierarchy.
And Muir wasn't content with just stirring things up in Scotland, was he? He reached out across the Irish Sea.
He did. He actively sought links with the United Irishmen. September 1792, he's personally drafting these fraternal greetings, trying to build unity between the Scottish and Irish reform movements.
That must have sent chills down the spine of the government in London. The idea of a coordinated Celtic revolutionary front.
Absolutely terrified them. You see it at the first big meeting of the Friends of the People, their general convention. Muir gets up to read this message of friendship from the Irish, and he faces immediate, fierce opposition from within his own movement. People were shouting that it contained treason or misprision of treason against the union with England just for reading a greeting.
Wow. How did he respond to that?
His defense was incredibly bold. He stood his ground and declared, and this is a powerful quote, we cannot consider ourselves as mowed and melted down into another country.
He's asserting Scotland's distinct political identity there, isn't he? Challenging the whole basis of the Union, implicitly at least.
Exactly. And the government heard that loud and clear. From that moment, he was a marked man.
They had eyes on him.
Well, yes. A government spy had infiltrated the convention. The Lord Advocate, Robert Dundas, it's Henry Dundas's nephew, keeping it at the family, he starts planning charges. Initially, they were even thinking high treason. Muir gets arrested January 2nd, 1793. The charge is sedition. He's released on bail.
And then he makes this rather unexpected trip, doesn't he, to France?
Yes, slightly strange episode. He goes to London first, then heads over to Paris. Apparently, it was this desperate, probably naive attempt to persuade the French leaders not to execute King Louis XVI. He maybe hoped it could somehow prevent war between Britain and France breaking out.
A bit of a long shot, surely.
Absolutely doomed from the start. He got there just as the execution was happening. But, he met people like Condorcet, Thomas Paine. He was received well. But crucially, his absence from Scotland gave his enemies the opening they needed.
Right. The government reschedules his trial for February 11th, 1793. He's stuck in France. War had just broken out. Getting passports, finding passage back, it was suddenly impossible.
So he can't appear. And the judge, the infamous Lord Braxfield, declares him a fugitive from justice on February 25th.
And the establishment pounces.
Instantly. Henry Erskine, who was dean of the Faculty of Advocates, calls a meeting. And on March 6th, Thomas Muir is unanimously expelled from the faculty, struck off the roll of advocates. His career, his profession, gone. Destroyed, simply because he couldn't physically get back for a trial date set while he was unavoidably detained abroad, even before any verdict.
Just incredible. But he does eventually make it back, via Ireland.
He does. He stops off in Ireland, gets formally sworn in as a member of the United Irishmen, doubling down, really. Then he lands in Portpatrick, Scotland on August 24th, 1793.
His 28th birthday, what a way to celebrate.
Arrested immediately, of course. And the trial happens just days later, August 30th, in the High Court in Edinburgh.
And the charges? Still sedition.
Still sedition. But look at the specifics they focused on. It wasn't about plotting revolution. It was things like allegedly making seditious speeches claiming the government was oppressive, and, critically, exhorting 3 people in his home parish of Catter to read Thomas Paine's Rights of Man, and circulating Paine's work in Paisley.
So the core of the crime was recommending a book, encouraging people to read a political pamphlet.
That was essentially it. And the evidence itself was shaky, to say the least.
The sources say the witnesses were pressured, coached.
Yes, there are strong suggestions, even contemporary accounts, saying witnesses, including a maid from his own father's house, were bought, coached, and told lies about what books Muir recommended or discussed. And when Muir's defense team tried to bring in character witnesses, people who could speak to his actual views and reputation, Judge Braxfield just shut them down, reportedly saying something like, he knew nothing about law when referring to one potential witness.
And Braxfield himself, he made no secret of his views, did he?
None whatsoever. His bias was legendary. He wasn't just anti-reform. He seemed to view the existing British Constitution as basically perfect, divinely ordained even. There's that famous quote attributed to him from the trial. The Constitution was the best that ever was since the creation of the world, and it is not possible to make it better.
So any attempt to change it, even suggesting changes, was inherently criminal in his eyes.
Pretty much. And the jury, packed with members of the Goldsmiths Hall Association, a notoriously anti-reform, pro-government group, they swore loyalty to the existing Constitution. Hardly impartial.
So Muir must have known he stood no chance.
He knew. He absolutely knew the verdict was a foregone conclusion. So he seems to have decided, okay, if justice here was futile, then his best move was to use the trial as a platform. He chose to speak openly and unguardedly, not really trying to win acquittal, but aiming his words at the public record, at posterity. He was positioning himself as the necessary sacrifice, the show trial scapegoat.
And the sentence reflected that, didn't it? It was harsh.
Brutal. 14 years transportation to Botany Bay, New South Wales for sedition. This was a sentence usually handed down for serious felonies, not for political speech or distributing pamphlets, especially for a man of his standing. He and the 4 others tried around the same time, Palmer, Skirving, Margaret, Gerald. They became known as the Scottish political martyrs. Their cases marked a real escalation, the start of Britain transporting political dissenters to Australia.
Okay, so that brings us to part 3. The Global Odyssey of Exile, 1793-1799. If the trial was high drama, this next phase is pure adventure movie stuff.
It really is.
Yeah.
His legal life was over. But this incredible, almost unbelievable journey across the globe was just beginning, spanning 4 continents in just 6 years.
The journey out must have been horrific in itself. They were held on prison hooks first.
Yes, down at Woolwich on the Thames.
Yeah.
Filthy, disease-ridden floating prisons. Then they were shipped out on a vessel called the Surprise in May 1794. Conditions on board transport ships were notoriously bad.
But once they got to Australia, their situation was slightly different from the average convicts, because they were political prisoners.
That's a key point. They had funds. Wealthy Whigs back in London had raised money to support them. This meant they weren't entirely dependent on the colonial authorities for food or shelter, and crucially, they weren't forced into hard labor gangs.
So they had a degree of freedom within the penal colony at Port Jackson, what's now Sydney Harbour.
Relatively speaking, yes. Muir used his funds strategically. He bought himself a piece of land, built a small hut, deliberately choosing a spot slightly away from the main settlement, out of the governor's immediate sightline.
Smart. Keeping a low profile. And he bought a boat.
He did, a small boat. Ostensibly for fishing or exploring the harbor, perhaps, but for Muir, it was always step 1 of the escape plan. Australia was never the destination. It was just an obstacle.
He was planning this from the moment he arrived, wasn't he?
Seems like it. He was meticulously planning. He eventually made contact with an American ship captain, Ebenezer Dorr, master of the Otter out of Boston. Dorr agreed to help, but with one major condition. Muir had to get himself out of the heavily guarded harbor and rendezvous with the Otter offshore. The ship couldn't risk coming in close.
That sounds incredibly risky. How did he manage it?
Pure nerve and careful planning. On the evening of February 17th, 1796, under the cover of darkness, Muir and two convict servants he'd presumably befriended rowed his small boat out of Port Jackson. They had to hug the coastline, stay in the shadows, avoid patrols, and critically slip past the Royal Navy frigate that was blockading the harbor entrance. And somehow, they did it. They made the rendezvous.
Just amazing. But he went alone, didn't he? What about the other martyrs?
That's the really tragic part of the escape story. He was the only one who went. William Skirving was already desperately ill, dying from fever. Joseph Gerald was in the final stages of tuberculosis. Thomas Fysh Palmer, who was a minister, refused to abandon Gerald, who he was caring for. And the fifth, Maurice Margaret. Well, he'd become something of an outcast, accused of stirring up trouble during the voyage out. So Muir seized his chance, perhaps pragmatically realizing it was now or never.
Did he leave any word?
He left a note, addressed to the governor, thanking him for the relative tolerance he had shown the political prisoners, and stating his intention was simply to go to America and practice law at the American bar.
A slight understatement of his plans, perhaps. But the journey wasn't straight to America, was it? This gets even wilder.
Not at all. The Otter wasn't heading straight home. It sailed clear across the Pacific first, all the way to Vancouver Island off the coast of modern-day Canada. They anchored in Nootka Sound in June 1796. Wild, remote territory.
So Muir is now on the west coast of North America. How does he get south?
From there, the Otter sailed down the coast towards Spanish California. And this is where Muir's education again proved vital. He was fluent in Spanish. He managed to talk his way onto a Spanish vessel, convincing the pilot, a Don Jose Tovar, to take him further south. But his story, being an escaped British political prisoner, friendly with French revolutionaries, it started ringing alarm bells for the Spanish authorities.
Why? Weren't Spain and Britain enemies at this point?
They were. But Spain was also deeply suspicious of any revolutionaries, including the French. The Spanish crown saw them all as a threat to monarchy everywhere. So, although he initially got a decent reception in Monterey, California, the message got back to the viceroy in Mexico City. The viceroy decided Muir was probably a spy.
Oh dear. So out of the frying pan.
And into the fire. He was arrested, shipped down to Mexico City, then eventually sent to Havana, Cuba. There, he was thrown into a dungeon in the La Principia fortress for about 3 months. He even tried to escape from there, but failed.
How did he get out of that?
Resourcefulness again, and a bit of luck. He somehow got word out to Victor Hughes, who was the French government's agent in the Caribbean. Hughes alerted the Directory back in Paris. Hey, you know that famous Scottish martyr, the British exiled? The Spanish have got him locked up in Havana.
Ah, so the French intervened diplomatically.
They did. They demanded his release. But the wheels of diplomacy turned slowly. Before it was all sorted, the Spanish decided to ship Muir off to Spain itself, presumably for judgment there. And this leads directly to the incident that physically scarred him for the rest of his short life, the sea battle.
Right. April 26, 1797. The ship he's on, the Spanish frigate Nympha, is approaching Cadiz harbor in Spain. But the Royal Navy is blockading Cadiz.
Exactly. So the Nympha gets intercepted by British warships, and a fierce battle breaks out. Imagine Muir's position, exiled by Britain, now on a Spanish ship fighting against the British Navy.
It must have been agonizing.
He apparently found it unbearable. He actually asked the Spanish captain to put him ashore, saying he couldn't take up arms against his own countrymen, regardless of how badly their government had treated him.
Did the captain agree?
No, he refused. And during the fighting, Muir was hit by shrapnel from a British cannonball. It was a horrific facial injury. The sources say it smashed his left cheekbone and seriously injured both his eyes.
Devastating. The descriptions say it left his face permanently disfigured, drooping into a kind of perpetual grimace.
Horrific. But here's the incredible irony. That disfigurement probably saved him from being recaptured or even executed.
How so?
When the British eventually boarded the damaged Nympha and took prisoners, they were looking for the famous political exile, Thomas Muir. But the man they saw among the wounded was so badly injured, so unrecognizable, they didn't identify him. They just treated him as another wounded Spanish sailor and sent him ashore with the other casualties when they exchanged prisoners. He slipped through their fingers because of the injury.
Unbelievable. So he finally makes it to mainland Europe, to France.
Yes, he finally arrives in France in late 1797. And initially, he's welcomed as a hero of the French Republic. He's feted by politicians, by artists like the famous Jacques-Louis David. But the man who arrived was profoundly changed, not just physically. That last portrait of him shows the eye patch, the drooping face.
But changed inwardly, too.
Completely. The years of persecution, the harsh sentence, the isolation, the near-death experiences, they seem to have burned away any moderation left in him. He was now fully radicalized. He spent his last year or so relentlessly urging the French Directory, the government at the time, to launch a military invasion, not just of Ireland, but of Britain itself. His vision was to break up the UK and establish 3 independent republics, England, Scotland, and Ireland, presumably under French protection.
That's a massive shift from advocating for suffrage and parliamentary reform. He's now calling for foreign invasion.
It's a total transformation. And his intensity, his single-minded focus on this military solution, it actually started to put off some of his potential allies. Even Wolfe Tone, the leader of the United Irishmen, who was also in France seeking military aid, apparently found Muir's zeal a bit much. Tone thought Muir was perhaps unrealistic, maybe counterproductive with his constant demands.
So a man consumed by his cause, perhaps losing perspective.
Possibly. A man without a country, fueled by this revolutionary fire. It burned him out quickly. He died quite suddenly and seemingly alone in the small village of Chantilly, just outside Paris, on January 26, 1799. He'd moved there, apparently, to meet secretly with delegates from a new Scottish revolutionary group, the United Scotsmen. He was only 33 years old.
33. An incredible life packed into such a short time. Okay, let's move to the final part, part 4. The Long Road to Vindication, 1799 to 2020. His death wasn't the end of his story.
Not by a long shot. If you look at the bigger picture, Muir's story becomes this fascinating, almost morality play, doesn't it? It demonstrates how determined grassroots effort over generations can eventually challenge and even overturn the judgments of a powerful state, even if it takes, well, centuries.
He wasn't immediately forgotten, though. There's that big monument on Calton Hill in Edinburgh.
That's right, the Martyrs' Monument, erected in 1844, a massive 90-foot obelisk honoring Muir and the other 4 Scottish martyrs. There's another one in Nunhead Cemetery in London, too. So his memory was kept alive, particularly in radical and reformist circles.
But for the general public.
For the wider public, yeah, he did seem to gradually disappear from public consciousness, as one source puts it. His name recognition faded outside of, say, his home area near Glasgow or specific political history buffs.
So how did the modern revival happen? It seems very much like a local, community-driven effort initially.
It really is. The credit for the modern renaissance of Thomas Muir largely goes to dedicated local people. It arguably started back in the 1970s with a man named John Watson. He just started persistently promoting Muir's story at local events, historical societies, burn suppers, things like that, in the Bishopbriggs area near Huntershill.
Just keeping the flame alive.
Exactly. And then his son, Jimmy Watson, really picked up that torch and ran with it. Jimmy spearheaded the creation of the Friends of Thomas Muir charity, the FOTM. Their goals were clear: educate the public about Muir, link his story to modern ideas of citizenship and community development. It was a long-term, very focused, grassroots campaign.
And that steady work built momentum towards a major event, didn't it? The 250th anniversary of his birth in 2015.
Yes, the Thomas Muir 250 celebrations were the culmination of years of effort, and they were huge. 19 different events across Scotland, held at significant places. The University of Glasgow, where he studied, the Scottish Parliament representing the democracy he fought for, and significantly even the Faculty of Advocates, the very institution that had expelled him.
I remember seeing coverage of that. There was a big march in Edinburgh, wasn't there, with pipe bands?
Yeah, quite dramatic. Marching from the Martyrs' Monument on Calton Hill down to Holyrood, the site of the Parliament, there were memorial lectures, new artworks commissioned, like that striking painting by Ken Curry, The Trials of Thomas Muir, showing him wounded, stripped, almost like a religious martyr figure. And a memorial window dedicated at Catter Church, where he was an elder. It was a real national moment.
And politicians took notice, too.
They did. Alex Salmond, who was first minister not long before that, publicly suggested 2 things: campaigning for a formal posthumous pardon for Muir and making a film about his incredible global life story, raising his profile nationally and internationally.
But the pardon hasn't happened yet, has it? The big breakthrough came from within the legal profession itself, right? The Faculty of Advocates reversing its decision.
That's the final amazing chapter in the vindication story. It was driven by a senior lawyer, Ross McFarlane QC. He had attended some of the 2015 events and said afterwards he felt haunted by the injustice done to Muir. So he launched this personal crusade, digging into the faculty's old records, looking for a way to formally undo that expulsion from 1793.
And he found a way.
He did. It took several years, but he found a procedural route based on an old court order relating to the original fugitive status. And in July 2020, 227 years later, Thomas Muir was formally restored to the role of the Faculty of Advocates. It happened literally on the last day in office of the then Dean Gordon Jackson QC. A hugely symbolic act, correcting that historic wrong.
And the timing of that restoration, it was almost uncanny, wasn't it? Coinciding with renewed criticism of Henry Dundas.
The historical symmetry is incredible. Just as Muir was being formally welcomed back into the legal fold, there was this wave of public debate and condemnation surrounding Henry Dundas's legacy, particularly his role in delaying the abolition of the slave trade, and, relevant here, his heavy-handed suppression of democratic dissent in Scotland back in the 1790s. There were calls to remove Dundas's statue in Edinburgh, so you had this moment where the persecutor's reputation was tumbling, just as the victim was finally being fully vindicated. Poetic justice, perhaps?
Muir's influence wasn't just legal or political either. He touched Scottish culture, particularly Robert Burns.
Yes, there's a strong connection there. Robert Burns was definitely following Muir's trial very closely. The political atmosphere of repression and the fight for rights in the 1790s heavily influenced Burns' later work. Think of his great democratic anthem, A Man for That. The core idea is equality, worth beyond rank or title. They directly echo the principles Muir was transported for defending. There's also a sentimental myth connecting Burns's famous song Scots Wha Hae directly to the date of Muir's trial, using it as patriotic defiance. The exact dating might be debated by scholars, but there's no doubt the political persecution Muir represented was weighing heavily on Burns' mind when he wrote it.
And his legacy extends beyond Scotland and the UK. He's recognized internationally.
He is. He's featured in the 2000 Years of Democracies exhibition at the Museum of Australian Democracy in Canberra, acknowledged as a key figure in that global story of fighting for democratic rights.
But there's still one piece of unfinished business, isn't there? His actual home.
That's right. While his name and reputation have been restored, his family home, Huntershill House, up near Glasgow, well, the sources say it remains sadly needing some care and attention.
Ooh.
There's been ongoing local debate and controversy about how best to preserve it as a site of historical interest. So, the physical legacy, the bricks and mortar associated with him, that still needs securing. A tangible link to the man himself.
Okay, let's wrap this up with the outro. The question of democracy. We followed Thomas Muir's path from, the determined student arguing about church appointments, all the way to being this exiled, battle-scarred revolutionary figure. We've seen how his relentless fight for ideas we mostly take for granted now, the right to vote, challenging unfair power, cost him everything. His profession, his country, eventually his life, dead at just 33.
And it does make you reflect on his personality, his methods. One historian we looked at, Professor Carruthers, raises this interesting point. Muir was always in trouble, wasn't he? Kicked out of his church group, effectively kicked out of university, expelled from the Faculty of Advocates. Even later in France, his intense zeal apparently repelled wolf tone. So the question Carruthers poses is, was he the purely uncompromising hero we celebrate? Or was he perhaps also someone with, let's say, challenging social or political skills, someone who struggled to build consensus?
That's a really interesting nuance. Maybe his absolute refusal to compromise was both his greatest strength, the source of his idealistic purity, and also a weakness, making him difficult to work with politically.
It could be both, couldn't it? But we absolutely have to acknowledge where that uncompromising path ultimately led him. It led to radicalization. He started by seeking constitutional reform within the existing system. He ended up advocating for a foreign military invasion to overthrow that system entirely and set up a republic. Today, we rightly honor him as an apostle of democracy for those initial constitutional aims.
So where does that leave us? What's the final thought for our listeners?
Well, it comes back to that line between heroism and maybe obsession. Muir willingly bore the unbearable consequences, exile, injury, isolation for his beliefs. When the system refuses to bend, when constitutional change is blocked at every turn, as it was for him, how far is it legitimate to push? What's the line between being an uncompromising hero fighting for ideals and perhaps becoming someone fixated on achieving the unattainable, no matter the personal cost? His life forces us to confront that fundamental question he faced back in that biased Edinburgh courtroom. When you see injustice, when the system seems rigged, which side are you on, and how far are you willing to go?
A question that resonates just as strongly today in any society grappling with dissent and reform, a powerful legacy. We definitely encourage everyone listening to reflect on Thomas Muir's incredible journey. Maybe even check out the Thomas Muir Heritage Trail if you're ever near Glasgow, and walk in the footsteps of the father of Scottish democracy.